Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. Today I'm going to talk a bit about learning Japanese because yesterday I did a video in Japanese, so I thought it would be timely to talk a bit about that. I'm going to be doing these various non-English videos, but I'm going to try to maintain twice a week in English for those of you who don't understand these various foreign languages. But I'm hoping that the other, Japanese, whatever, French, Chinese, will attract viewers in other languages. I've always felt, and this is part of my whole attitude towards creating LingQ, is that even English language speakers should learn other languages, and the whole world need not speak English, even though, of course, English is very useful. Japanese. I moved to Japan in 1971 from Hong Kong, where I had studied Chinese. I had the great advantage in approaching Japanese that I already could read the characters. So the first thing about learning Japanese is that if you want to read, you're going to have to learn the characters. You're not going to be able to read very much just with hiragana. Let's take a step back. In Japanese, there are three writing systems. Hiragana, which is a phonetic script. It's based on syllables. Kaki, ku, ke, ko. Each syllable has a symbol. And there is a parallel one called katakana, which is used for foreign origin words or words that are sort of sound words, smash, crash, and stuff. And then there's characters. You do need the characters. And I believe it's very useful to be able to read in order to accumulate sufficient vocabulary to have intelligent discussions. Okay. I went to Japan, I had the characters, that was a tremendous advantage. I learned Japanese, and this again, there were questions after my previous video. How long did I spend to learn Japanese? How did I do it? And so forth. I lived in Japan for 9 years. That's obviously a tremendous advantage. I've said many times, the more you speak a language, the better you get at speaking it. However, within 1 year of arriving in Japan, I was conducting business in Japanese, giving talks in Japanese. I was working at the Canadian Embassy. So I learned it rather quickly. I did it on my own. I didn't go to school. I didn't have a tutor. I just listened and read a lot. And I watched TV. At first I could understand the baseball games on TV, and eventually I moved from there to political discussions because, again, the newspapers were a little easier to read because there's more characters there. And what was most difficult, of course, was movies and soap operas and those kinds of things that were on TV. But certainly over the course of the 9 years, my Japanese improved. And I think this is another important point. You can very quickly arrive at a level in a language where you can actually communicate and do stuff. But then to get better and better and better and better, it all takes a long time. So, 9 years. What did I do? Okay, I read. I have to admit that I used a lot of, I read books that had vocabulary lists. Rarely did I use the dictionary because it's very frustrating. It's hard to look things up and you forget them right away. So I used material that had vocabulary lists for each lesson, whatever I could find. I went through all the sort of grammar textbooks, if you want, Lesson 1, my name is Mr. Suzuki. Lesson 2, this is my family. Lesson 3, at the grocery store, and so forth. Went through them as quickly as possible. I never do exercises, as I've said before, and I don't remember any of the grammatical terms. I decided to Google here, Japanese grammar, learn Japanese, and the resources available today are phenomenal. And if any of you want to start learning Japanese, or if you are in the midst of learning Japanese, you should certainly make yourself aware of all the resources that are out there. There's one, I Googled Japanese grammar. The first thing I got was, of course, a thing from Wikipedia, which is hopeless. The Japanese language has a regular agglutinative verb morphology with both productive and fixed elements. In language typology, it has many features divergent from most European languages. Its phrases are exclusively head final and compound sentences are exclusively left branching. Blah, blah, blah. If that was my only source, I would quit. I wouldn't go beyond that. To me, that is hopeless. You don't need it to be that complicated. There's a thing called the learningpage.com. There's Tae Kim's Guide to Japanese, and many more resources. Find the one that you like. Now, with a lot of these resources, especially Tae Kim and the Japanese page, I think, excellent in that they provide sort of sample sentences of the different sort of patterns in Japanese. And the Japanese page actually has audio. It's actually an excellent resource. They both are. I think Tae Kim goes into too much detail about what can happen and could happen and stuff. You don't really need that. But they're both good. And they both have iPhone apps as well. I think Tae Kim's is free, and the Japanese page is like €8 or something. But it looks to be well worth it. If I were learning Japanese, I would get that app. Now, how to use these resources. You can't learn a language by just reading all these isolated phrases. So this has to be done in conjunction with, again, a lot of listening and reading. And so you listen and read, then you go back to these resources. And at first it seems overwhelming. There are so many patterns, so many things that are difficult. How can I ever learn this? But as you become familiar with some of these patterns, you start to notice other patterns. So you go back to the, whatever you decide to use as your resource for how the language works, the different patterns of the language. Then you go back to listening and reading. You start to notice it. You go back to this resource. So that's how to go about it. Briefly on the Japanese language, the way the Japanese language works is they have sort of words that act as punctuation marks in a way. If you say, watashi wa Kanada-jin desu. Watashi is I, okay? And one of the delights of Japanese is there's various ways of saying I, you, and so forth, depending on degrees of politeness. But don't worry about it. You get used to it. So, watashi wa. Wa is like, comma. Me, I am Canadian. Watashi wa Canada, Kanada-jin, Canadian. Jin is person. Another delight in Japanese is jin is also pronounced hito. So, because Japanese borrowed a lot of words from Chinese, therefore those words, the same word, the same character, can have a pronunciation which originates from Chinese and is kind of similar to the Chinese pronunciation, typically one syllable, and the original Japanese before the Chinese words were imported pronunciation. So, watashi wa Kanada-jin desu. And the end of the sentence in Japanese is always very important. That's where things happen. So, watashi wa, Kanada-jin desu. Anata wa, anata you, anata wa, anata, Kanada-jin desu ka? And the ka at the end is a question mark. So, anata wa. So, anata wa Kanada-jin desu. You are a Canadian. Anata wa Kanada-jin desu ka? Let's put the question mark at the end. So that's very basic. And if you're not a Canadian, you say, watashi wa Kanada-jin. Now here's where, again, it was des, right? Kanada-jin de wa arimasen. That's the long way of saying no. Or you can say Kanada-jin janai. De wa contracts to ja. And arimasen, which is negative, arimasu is, arimasen is not. But instead of saying de wa arimasen, you can say janai. Kanada-jin janai. So again, not to overwhelm you, but it's just to recognize that there are often simplified ways of saying things. I found it useful to learn I would call it neutral des form. Kore wa, this, kore wa, hon desu, book. Kore wa hon desu. Kore wa hon de wa arimasen. Or kore wa hon janai desu. Or janai. Okay? So things happen at the end. Like, ashita, tomorrow. Ikimasu. Like, ima, now, ikimasu. Ashita, ikimasu. We go, or go. They don't even bother with we, you, they. You figure it out from the context. Ikitai. A lot of things happen at the end. Iku is to go. Ikitai, I want to go. Ikudaro, will probably go. Ikukara, because I go or after I go. So a lot of things happen at the end in Japanese sentences. The other thing is, watashi wa, Kanada e, or watashi wa asoko, over there, asoko e ikimasu. E, so that these They're not prepositions, they're postpositions. Let's see. What would be another one? De. Tokyo de. De means at. Tokyo de shigoto, work, wo shiteimasu. So a lot of these little postpositions come afterward. The good news in Japanese is there's no gender, there's no number. The nouns don't really inflect, Whereas in Russian, if you buy someone, to someone, of someone, the word, the actual noun changes. In Japanese, they don't change. So, all in all, I don't find Japanese to be a very difficult language. The pronunciation is fairly straightforward. The only thing is that you have to get used to the fact that the sentence order is different. And that's all I would say. Don't get in. When I see someone talking about S-O-V, S-V-O, I'm out of there fast. Enough to say the word order is different. And you have to get used to that and don't try to resist it. And just get used to the patterns of how they say things. Go back to the lists that you can find, that those resources that I suggested, the Japanese page, or Take Him, or whatever you find under Japanese grammar, and spend a lot of time listening and reading. And you will find that, there's no tones in Japanese, unlike Chinese. It's a language where it's, in a way, how would I put it? Whereas in French, everything is very clearly structured and you have to put the words together in a certain way to express yourself so clearly and logically. The Japanese are not like that. They kind of sort of like, you know what I mean? That's kind of the way the language gets put together. At least that's the impression it creates with me. And yet, within those constraints, people who speak it well express themselves very elegantly. It's a different kind of elegance from the French elegance, or the Mandarin elegance, or the Italian elegance, or the Russian elegance. Every language has its own flavor, and you have to kind of get used to that flavor and enjoy it and not resist it or find it strange. You have to get over that and just kind of try to get it into you and get it a part of you. So, those of you interested in Japanese, go to it. There's lots of resources on the web. And of course, you can also come to LingQ, where we have Japanese. I warn you that because LingQ has 21 languages, it doesn't operate the same for every language. Some of the functionality works better with some languages than with others. In Japanese, there is an issue and in Chinese, of where the words split. What is a word? And so I would say 95% of the time it works fine, but there are sometimes some inconveniences with LingQ. It doesn't bother me. I'm using it to increase my vocabulary in Japanese. There's lots of content there with both audio and text and all of our functionality, but it's only one resource, and there's lots of other resources out there for those of you who are interested in learning Japanese. And don't hesitate, by the way, to let me know what you would like me to talk about, or maybe you'd like me to shut up. I don't know. Bye for now.